Have you ever sat in a room full of people laughing at you and realized the cruelest ones were the people who were supposed to love you most? That's exactly where I was. And what I did next didn't just silence a room. It dismantled 17 years of lies in under 3 minutes. My name is Sara Linton. I'm 35 years old. I'm a senior architect at Aldrin and Pierce in Charlotte, North Carolina. I restore historic buildings, old courthouses, forgotten libraries, theaters that haven't seen a crowd in decades. There's something I've always loved about taking something broken and making it stand again. I suppose I've had a lot of practice. Professionally, I go by S. Pierce Linton. I kept my ex-husband's name hyphenated because the architecture world already knew it, easier to keep than to explain. I live alone, in a one-bedroom apartment with a drafting table by the window and a coffee maker that runs before my alarm does. The two people I trust most in this world are Daniel Reeves, my colleague, 38, former Army IT, the most unshakable person I've ever met, and my grandmother, Elaine Linton, 86 years old, sharp as a tack, and the only member of my family who ever loved me without a single condition attached. But none of that is what people in Greystone, South Carolina know about me. In Greystone, I'm the dropout, the divorcee, the disappointment. My father's version of me, the one he built over 17 years of dinners and handshakes and quiet, polished lies, was the only version that town ever heard. Until the night of my sister Brooke's wedding reception, 220 guests, crystal chandeliers, white linen, and a 12-foot projection screen mounted at the front of the room like a stage. One by one, the words appeared. Dropout, divorced, broke, alone. And then the last one, the one they saved for the end, filling that screen in letters tall enough to read from the parking lot. The room erupted. My father, Richard, raised his glass from the head table and smiled. That's family for you. Lighten up. My mother, Catherine, watched me with a smile so thin it could have been drawn on with a pencil. Then my sister leaned into the microphone and said, "Don't worry, Sarah. If you cry, everyone's going to think this is a funeral." I didn't cry. I picked up my phone. I typed one word, "now," and the room went so quiet, I could hear the ice shifting in my mother's glass. But to understand why I pressed that button, you need to know what happened 17 years ago, and why I stayed silent for every single year in between. To understand why I pressed that button, you have to go back 17 years to a kitchen table in Greystone, South Carolina, in a town where people have known your last name for 3 generations, and your father's word is the only currency that matters. I was 18 years old, and by the time I walked out of that house, my entire life had been rearranged without my permission. My father, Richard Linton, slid a document across the table, a land transfer form. 2.5 acres on the edge of town land my grandmother Elaine had signed over to me on my 16th birthday, a quiet stretch of grass with a creek and an oak tree that had been standing for 100 years. She had pressed the deed into my hands and said, "This is yours, Sarah, no matter what happens." Richard said he needed the parcel for a development project and needed me to sign it back. I looked at my mother. Catherine sat at the far end of the table, slowly turning the pages of a magazine, not once looking up. The only sound in that kitchen was the soft turn of glossy paper. I didn't sign. 3 days later, my college tuition fund had been frozen, the account my parents had built since I was born, gone without a word. 10 days after that, Richard stood in the front hallway with his arms crossed and said, "You walk out that door, you don't come back." My little sister Brooke was 12 years old. She stood at the top of the staircase and watched. She didn't say a word. I left with 1 duffel bag and $51. What came next? Nobody in Greystone ever knew. For 3 weeks, I slept in my car outside Greenville. I worked a register at a gas station, then double shifts at a diner that smelled like fryer grease and bleach. I failed my math exam twice before earning my GED at 20. I transferred to the University of North Carolina on a need-based scholarship and studied architecture because I believed in building things that couldn't be taken away with a signature. I graduated at 24, walked across that stage, shook the dean's hand, went home to my apartment, and ate ramen on the floor, alone. At 25, I married Connor Walsh, 13 years older, magnetic in public, suffocating behind closed doors, a quieter version of my father. I got out at 28. At 29, a doctor told me I would never have children. I processed that alone in a waiting room under fluorescent lights, holding a magazine 3 years out of date. By 35, I was a senior architect with 2 consecutive Southern Excellence in Architecture awards on my wall. Nobody in Greystone knew any of it. And for 17 years, that silence was the greatest weapon they had over me until the night I decided the truth was mine to use. I had spent 17 years building a life they knew nothing about. Then one Wednesday night, a single phone call made it impossible to stay invisible any longer. It was almost 11 p.m. I was at my desk in Charlotte, working through elevation drawings for a historic courthouse. My coffee had gone cold. My back ached. A normal Wednesday until my phone lit up with an unknown South Carolina number. The voice was careful, professional. "My name is Carol Hayes. I'm a nurse at Cedarview, Memory and Care. Your grandmother asked me to call you." I gripped the phone. Grandma Elaine, 86 years old, scheduled for hip replacement surgery in 3 weeks. Carol told me the risks were real at her age. Then she lowered her voice just slightly. "There's one more thing. Your grandmother wanted you to know they're planning something at the reception. Something involving you. She wanted you to be ready." I set the phone down and sat without moving for 10 full minutes. Across the room, my Southern Excellence Award hung in its frame, catching the light. I looked at it for a long time. Then I started making calls. The required family dinner came first, Richard's condition before he'd clear my name at the care center. I drove 2.5 hours to Greystone. The Linton house hadn't changed. White columns, trimmed hedges, an American flag by the door, the full performance of respectability. Catherine greeted me with a slow look up and down. "You look pale, honey. Are you sleeping enough?" Brooke arrived late, 4.5-carat ring catching every light in the room, and pulled me into the hallway. "Keep it simple with what you wear. The Harlows are very particular." A pause. "Still no one special in your life?" Before I left, Catherine pressed a garment bag into my hands, a shapeless beige dress, 2 sizes too large. "This color is really lovely on you." Richard stopped me at the door. "The Harlows are old money. One wrong move, and everything falls apart. Don't embarrass this family." Driving back to Charlotte, the name Harlow kept turning in my mind, and then it clicked. I pulled up the client database the moment I got to my desk. Harlow Heritage Foundation. There it was. I had been the lead architect on the Greystone Mill restoration for 7 months. 4 video calls, dozens of emails. Margaret Harlow, Ethan's mother, chair of the foundation, knew my work, my design philosophy, my entire project timeline. She knew S. Pierce Linton. She just didn't know my face. I filed it away and said nothing. Daniel had done his own digging. He called me the next morning. "The AV company running the reception is short-staffed. They posted for a freelance tech last night." I already knew what he was going to say. "I applied," he said. "Got a call back in 15 minutes. We built the slideshow together that week, 7 clean slides. My graduation photo, my architecture license, a job site image, the award, a final statement slide, and one last addition, a screenshot of the family group chat, Brooke's preview, sitting right there on the screen, with every label and cartoon sticker intact. No caption, no comment, just the evidence, speaking for itself. Daniel looked it over and said, "This isn't a war, Sara. It's just the truth. And the truth doesn't need to raise its voice." He slid the USB across the desk. The code word was one single word now. I visited Grandma Elaine 1 week before the wedding. Catherine parked outside and scrolled her phone in the hallway without coming in. Elaine was smaller than I remembered, thinner hair, trembling hands, but her eyes were exactly the same, sharp and steady and full of knowing. She grabbed my hand the second I sat down. "Let me look at you. You're well. You're strong. I can see it." Then she reached under her pillow and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a photocopy of a property deed my name, clear as the day it was written, untouched after 17 years. Richard had never managed to transfer that land. He had been lying about it the entire time. A knock at the door. Catherine's voice from the hallway, clipped and impatient. "Time's up." I folded the envelope into the inner pocket of my jacket, leaned down, and kissed my grandmother's forehead. "That's my girl," she whispered. 3 days later, Brooke added me to a family group chat and sent a preview of the wedding slideshow. Old photos of me, filtered and distorted, covered in cartoon stickers and bold labels. Brooke typed beneath it with a laughing emoji. Catherine replied not "Don't do this," not "This is wrong, just keep it tasteful." Richard said nothing at all. I took screenshots of every message. I closed the chat. I had given them one last chance to be decent, and they had made their choice. The morning of the wedding arrived the way October mornings do in South Carolina: clear sky, cool air, the kind of light that makes everything look more beautiful than it actually is. I wore the navy dress I had picked out myself. The beige dress my mother chose was still in the hotel closet, untouched. At Greystone Community Church, I took a seat in the last row. Nobody slid over. Nobody said hello. Richard worked the center aisle like a man running for office, handshakes and shoulder claps, all the way to the front. Catherine murmured to a friend just loud enough to carry, "Both my daughters are here today, even the complicated one." Near the side entrance, Daniel was adjusting a microphone cable in his AV Polo. Our eyes met for half a second. One small nod. That was all we needed. The reception at Greystone Country Club was everything the Linton family wanted the world to see. Crystal chandeliers, white linen, gardenias thick in the warm air, and a 12-foot projection screen at the front like a throne. I was at table 16, back corner, half hidden behind a column, right beside the kitchen door. During her toast, Brooke glanced toward the back and smiled. "My sister Sara is here tonight. She actually made it. That's something, right?" Catherine appeared at my elbow moments later. "Don't drink too much, don't talk about yourself, and smile." I smiled not because she told me to, but because I knew exactly what was coming and I had already made my decision. At the head table, Margaret Harlow held her wine glass and never once raised it to her lips. Then the lights dimmed. And now a very special presentation from the Linton family. The screen filled with images of Brooke ballet recitals, birthday cakes, vacations, Richard's arm around her shoulders with the ocean behind them. I was not in a single photograph. Then the music shifted to something playful, and the screen read, "And now, let's meet the rest of the family." Brooke looked straight at me and gave a slow, small wave, the smile of someone who already knows how the story ends. The first slide landed like a slap, an old photo of me, filtered yellow and grainy, bold white letters, "Drop out." Scattered uncertain laughter, then divorced louder, someone clapping, then broke, then alone. Then the final slide loaded a clip art image with a thick red X and a single word underneath, large enough to read from the far end of the room. The laughter that followed was the uncomfortable kind, the kind where people realize too late they've gone somewhere they shouldn't have. Brooke leaned into the microphone, voice sweet as syrup. "Don't laugh too hard, Sara. You might actually cry." Richard raised his glass. That's family, sweetheart. Lighten up. Catherine looked directly at me with the faintest smile, like a judge recording a final score. Across the room, Margaret Harlow set her glass down on the table. The sound was soft, but in that silence it carried. Her jaw tightened. I looked down at my phone. The word was already typed. One word. Now. I heard my grandmother's voice not as memory, but as presence. Don't let them break you again. My thumb pressed send. 3 seconds. The screen went black. Brooke frowned. Hey, can someone fix that? Daniel pulled Brooke's USB and inserted mine. The screen came back to life. White text on black. Sara Linton, the truth. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. Slide after slide filled that 12-foot screen, my graduation photo, my architecture license, a job site image with blueprints under my arm, the award plaque, and then the words I had written myself. You called me a dropout. I have a master's degree. You called me broke. I own my home. You called me a failure. I design buildings for a living. And then the 7th slide, no caption, no comment, just the screenshot of the family group chat, every label and sticker exactly as sent, right there for 200 people to see. Richard shoved back from the head table and crossed the room. Turn that off. Right now. He grabbed the AV booth door handle. It didn't move. Daniel had locked it 25 minutes before the reception started. Richard yanked once, twice, then turned back to the room, face flushed deep red. You are ruining your sister's wedding. I stood up from table 16, voice steady and calm. No, I said. I'm just showing everyone the part of the story you left out. And when I stepped away from that table and moved toward the center of the room, I knew there was no going back. But for the first time in 17 years, I didn't want to. What happened next didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the slow collapse of something that had been hollow for a very long time. Richard crossed the floor and dropped his voice low, not low enough. Sit down right now, or you will never see your grandmother again. I looked at him steadily. You have used Grandma Elaine as a leash my entire life. That ends tonight. From the head table, a chair scraped back. Ethan Harlow stood up slowly and said, Let her speak. I want to hear this. Brooke grabbed his arm. He pulled free without looking at her. I stood in the center of that room without a microphone and said what I had never been allowed to say. I didn't drop out. My father froze my college fund at 18 because I refused to sign away land my grandmother had given me. I didn't choose to be alone. I was thrown out of that house with $51. My divorce wasn't failure. Leaving a controlling marriage is called survival. I looked directly at Brooke and said, a medical diagnosis is not a punchline and does not belong on a 12-foot screen at a wedding. I looked at Catherine and said, she had helped design those slides and handed me a dress meant to make me disappear. I looked at Richard and said, the only embarrassment in that room was what they had just done to their own daughter. Then, Margaret Harlow stood and walked through the room without hurrying. She stopped beside me and said quietly, S. Pierce Linton, you're the architect on the Greystone Mill restoration. She turned to Richard, her voice flat and precise. The woman you just put on that screen is the architect I hired to restore the most important building in this town. Richard opened his mouth. I didn't know. Margaret cut through it. You didn't know because you never bothered to. I reached into my jacket and placed the property deed on the nearest table. The land you've been claiming belongs to Linton Properties is still in my name. It always has been. Richard Harlow, Ethan's father, stood, buttoned his jacket with quiet finality, and said, Margaret, let's go. Margaret looked at Richard Linton one last time. The Greystone Partnership. It's over. Brooke broke fast and perfectly, tears arriving on cue. She is ruining my wedding day. Margaret turned and calmly repeated the words from the slideshow one by one, asking which part exactly was the joke. The tears lost their power. Ethan looked at his wife and said, You told me she was unstable, jealous, but she has an award on her wall, Brooke, and you made that slideshow. Catherine's composure cracked, 40 years of polish falling away at once. You think those slides change anything? I said, you did this for the image, Mom, not for the family. And everyone in this room just saw the difference. From the middle of the room, an older woman with white hair rose from her chair and said clearly, I have known Elaine Linton for 55 years. She would be ashamed of what happened here tonight. Her heels clicked across the hardwood, steady, measured, final. One couple stood, then another table, then more, quietly walking out without drama, simply leaving. I stood in what remained and said I had not come to destroy anything. I came because Grandma Elaine asked me to, because she still believed this family was capable of something better. I did not hate anyone in that room. But I was done being the joke, done performing for people who had already decided I was nothing. If they wanted me in their lives, it started with respect, not conditions, not performances, just respect. And if that wasn't possible, then this was goodbye. I walked past Richard. He stared at the floor. Past Catherine. She was looking at the tablecloth. Past Brooke. She turned her face away. At the door, a voice stopped me. Miss Linton. Margaret stood near the exit, jacket on, keys in hand. Monday morning. My office. We have a mill to finish. I nodded and walked out into the October night. Daniel was leaning against my car holding 2 gas station coffees. I got in. He handed me one. You okay? He asked. No, I said, but better than I've been in 17 years. 3 messages arrived before we left the parking lot. Ethan apologizing. Nurse Carol telling me Grandma Elaine had watched the whole thing on a family live stream and was laughing and said, that's my girl, and Margaret confirming that Richard Linton would not be building on my land. In the weeks that followed, Greystone did what small towns always do, it talked. Catherine was quietly removed from the fall gala committee. Richard lost 2 business partners in 10 days. Ethan moved out. Brooke's book club relocated without telling her. Richard called eventually, skipping straight to an offer. Name your price for the land. I told him it wasn't for sale, it was my grandmother's gift and it was staying mine. He said, I was destroying the family over a piece of dirt. I told him he had destroyed the family over that same piece of dirt 17 years ago. He hung up. Brooke called 2 weeks later, her voice stripped of every performance, just exhaustion and the first sounds of honesty. The slideshow was wrong, and she knew it. She said she didn't know who she was without being the favorite. I told her it was time to find out, and to talk to a good therapist, someone who would actually tell her the truth. Catherine sent 3 words. I am sorry. I read it. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready. And that was allowed. The following Saturday, I drove to Cedarview on my own, no phone call to Richard, no time limit, no Catherine in the hallway. Grandma Elaine was in the sunroom, morning light catching her white hair, a crocheted blanket across her lap. When she saw me, her whole face opened the real kind of smile, the kind that starts deep in the eyes. She took my hand and said, You stood up, right there in the middle of that room. You stood up. I told her she had taught me how. Then I told her everything, and she listened to every word, asked questions, laughed at the hard parts. Nobody knocked on the door, nobody said time was up. Outside the window, an old oak tree spread wide across the lawn, rooted deep the way things grow when they've finally been left alone long enough. 3 months later, the final design for the Greystone Mill restoration was approved. Next month, I'll stand before the Greystone Town Council and present the building I've been rebuilding from the foundation up in front of some of the same people who watched me sit at table 16. This morning, I stood in front of my mirror navy blazer, white blouse, hair pulled back. On my dresser sat the council invitation, my name in clean black type, Sara Linton, senior architect. Not a hyphenated remnant of a marriage I survived, just my name, the one I was born with, the one I earned. They called me a dropout, a divorcee, broke, alone, and they put my private life on a screen for 200 strangers to laugh at. Some of those labels touched real things. None of them defined me. You do not need your family's permission to build a life worth living. You just have to stop asking for it. I picked up my keys and walked out the door. The October sun was sharp and clean, the air smelling like wood smoke and cold mornings, and something new just beginning. I drove west toward Greystone, not toward the old house, but toward the mill, the one I'm restoring, brick by brick, beam by beam, the same way I rebuilt everything else.